Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. May the peace, mercy, and blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be upon all of you. Welcome to Islam in Life, and thank you for welcoming us into your home and joining us in these important conversations that we have on this show. My name is Maymuna Hussein, and we welcome you from our studio here. We also want to remind you that our episodes are all recorded and they are available on podcast for you to listen to as well on several platforms that you'll see just come across the bottom of the screen there. The other thing I want to remind you is that this is a live show where our viewers can call in as well as send in your questions to our guests either on the YouTube chat there or join us on Zoom. You can find us on the meeting room ID, which is 905-822-2626. So as we begin, let us begin with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We begin with the remembrance and we praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and let us begin with some verses and recitation of the Holy Quran.
والذين يقولون ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين وجعلنا للمتقين إماما أولئك يجزون الغرفة بما صبروا ويلقون فيها تحية وسلاما خالدين فيها حسنت مستقرا ومقاما.
Sadaqallahu al-Aliyyil Azim. Brother Khalid, you are joining us online. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. How are you?
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Jazakumullah khair, Sister Maymuna. I'm still in Turkey, and I am finding it interesting to join here at 3:30 a.m. From Istanbul, Turkey. However, it also gives me the opportunity to view the discussion and the things that we're discussing today from a more perspective, inshallah.
Okay, I want to ask you to talk to us a little bit about our critical question of the week for our viewers this week and kind of situate us in it.
Well, that's a good test. So the question we have for our audience today to think about, and we want to encourage this thinking of basically, of course, we are all very conscious of the halal and the haram, and we make the decision, inshallah, that pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there is also value to understand the wisdom and to understand our Sharia and understand Islam as a way of life. So why would Muslims or why do Muslims not engage in celebrations that are not Islamic, not only from the side of the halal and the haram? Like, why do they make the choice of not celebrating events such as Valentine's or Halloween when they make this decision? So I believe that these are issues as we live in many different societies that have different opinions and different views and different lifestyles, to make these choices for ourselves and for our children, and understand where do these choices come from.
Jazakallah khair. So the question is, as Muslims, why do we choose not to participate in celebrations, as Brother Khalid is sharing, such as Valentine's Day or Halloween? So send us your thoughts. You can email us at productions@macnet.ca. You can also send us your thoughts on our social media platforms. So whether that's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, send us your thoughts. Now, let's talk about tonight's episode. So this evening, we continue our special series on Islam and the family institution. And a couple of weeks ago, we had talked about the marriage institution with our guests, Dr. Jasser Auda and Sister Hale Banani. And then last week, we spoke about the conversation on homosexuality and gender identity with our guest, Sheikh Mustafa Omar. And of course, if you missed any of these episodes, you can find those online, and you can also listen to the podcasts. This week, we continue to have our conversation on the family institution in Islam, and our conversation is on parenting, Allah-centered parenting, and so parenting through an Islamic framework. And again, reminding you that you can engage with our guests and send in your questions throughout the episode tonight. So before we go into our conversation, let's take a look at what our research team has put together for us.
Parenting is a tasking yet rewarding mission. Throughout the Quran and Sunnah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided believers with a guide on how to form a bond with one's children, as well as how to raise them to live a God-centered life. One throughout which their primary purpose is seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through worship and good deeds. Parents play a pivotal role in the upbringing of a child. Although as Muslims we understand that guidance only comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and that our duty as parents is limited to the influence we have on our children and not the result, we also understand that we are held accountable for the effort and sincerity we put into raising them. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, "A man is a shepherd in charge of the inhabitants of his household, and he is responsible for his flock. A woman is a shepherd in charge of her husband's house and children, and she is responsible for them." According to Dolan Eric W. study on how parents act on their religious beliefs linked to the onset of atheism and their children, it was shown that children who witness high levels of credibility-enhancing displays in their parents are more likely to believe in God with more certainty. CREDs are formed when parents worship with the same commitment and regularity that they teach their children. Also, when the actions of parents are consistently religiously driven, such as truthfulness and charity. The example that Muslim parents set both in the home and out of it has a notable impact on their children's conviction and practice of faith. Parents must strive to acquire a comprehensive understanding of their faith in order to play their role to the best of their abilities. The prophetic parenting model promotes teaching children the concepts of Tawheed, meaning oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ikhlas, meaning sincerity in all actions, Akhlaq, meaning good character, Adab, meaning proper etiquette within the Islamic framework of justice and compassion. It also promotes quality time with the children as well as healthy open channels of communication. Muslim parents are encouraged to build their homes as a sanctuary where the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is abundant. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "The house in which the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is made and the house in which Allah is not remembered are like the living and the dead." Similarly to every other deliberate action we take as Muslims, parenting requires sincere intention as well as seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's guidance and protection. This is demonstrated through the supplications of one's offspring even prior to conception, throughout life, and for future generations to come. An example of this in the Quran is the supplication of the mother of Maryam, who sought protection in Allah from the evils of shaitan for her unborn child and the future progeny to come. As translated from Surah Ali Imran verse 36, "I have named her Mary, and I seek your protection for her and her offspring from Satan, the cursed." Tonight we will be discussing parenting within the Islamic framework with our guest speakers, Sara Atiyah, Principal of Olive Grove School, and Rania Lawindi, CEO of Action for Humanity Canada.
Jazakallah khair. So we actually have Brother Khurram Khan, who will be joining us instead of Sister Rania Lawendi tonight. So Sister Sara Atiyah is the principal of Olive Grove School. She has also served at various capacities with the Muslim Association of Canada at the National Executive. She has led the national youth efforts as well, and has led iRise, an initiative focused on children and youth's tarbiyah, which she'll be talking about later this evening as well. She serves on the board of directors for NACI. And we also have Dr. Khurram Khan. Dr. Khurram Khan serves on the board of directors for the Muslim Association of Canada. He is an associate professor of medicine at McMaster University, and he is also an advisor to Islamic organizations and an Islamic lecturer in the community. So we are happy to have both of you this evening with us, and we want to get into this conversation. And I guess we'll open it up, inshallah, to have you both maybe comment on how do we actually, as parents, nurture resilient Muslim children. And I'll have both of you, as you're comfortable, share on that.
All right.
Thank you,
Bismillah
sister.
ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Go ahead, Brother Khuram.
Go ahead, Sister Sana.
All right. Jazakumullah khairan, Sister Maimuna. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. That's a big question to start off the discussion, and I think it has a lot of different parts or layers to talk about. As parents, as educators, as community members, we have a collective role to nurture our young people to become the best Muslims that they can be, and as you said, resilient young people, inshallah. As parents, as we're talking about parenting today, it's important for us to think about the different phases that our young people or that our kids are going through. So if you have younger children, what does that mean for our in terms of developing that resiliency and that strong Muslim identity as they grow older? We look at different things that impact them, and then when they're young, their youth, and then into their young adulthood. And I think it's important for us to be very intentional with our parenting. And I think that's something that as parents, mother and father in the household, that it's something we need to think about and discuss early on and agree upon a framework that we build our home on. That starts with us first, us as the adults, as the role models in the home. And I think the core of it, and I hope we get some more time to talk about this, is the God-centered piece. What's the title of this show? And so grounding our home, grounding our relationships as parents to one another, and grounding our home in around the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the identity of a Muslim, is really what sets the framework or sets the basis for building or helping our children connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I think that's the basis of it. And when we talk about resilience, there's all different facets there that we can talk about, but I think it's that pride in being a Muslim, that yaqeen, or that certainty that Islam is our success factor. And again, there's different ways to build on that as our children grow. But I would really say that that's the main piece around it, that we are intentional in our parenting, that our home is centered around Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that there's a collective agreement in the home on how we're going to raise our kids, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. Brother Khuram, I will invite you to add to this.
Thank you, mashallah. Thank you for the invitation as well. And it's a wonderful topic and a very important one for all Muslims, as we all come from families, and the family institution is really a pillar of society. It's the unit of the society that the rest of the society grows from. So it's very important. I would just even go further to beyond the Muslim home. It really begins with the individual. The idea that the Muslim himself or herself strives, and in a marriage relationship, when you have a husband and a wife, and both of their focus is to be the best of themselves, to strive in their learning and in their actions and in their deeds, then you have this common mission, and there's a sort of synergy that can occur with, and this is the beautiful example of the family, where if both parents are on the same mindset and the same track, they'll both help each other become even better versions of themselves. And this is the beginning of the Muslim family. Then of course we have the example that the Prophet ﷺ gave us, which is the example of the stages in how we parent based on the ages of the children and the different phases of life that they go through. And this is a critically important hadith and a lesson for all Muslims to understand. And this is a famous and well-known hadith, but I'll just share the meaning of it briefly with everyone. The Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said and instructed that for the first 7 years of the child's life, the parents should play with them and nurture the bond and the relationship of love and trust. And thereafter, the next 7 years, once that bond is there, that safety net and love exists between the parent and the child, the next 7 years, between the ages of 7 and 14 roughly, is when the relationship of education and teaching really begins. Now, that's not to say we don't teach them in the first 7 years, but there's a way of teaching and being methodical about teaching. And once you have that love and the trust, those next 7 years, and these are also the 7 years where a child will go through the stages of life and maturity. And so those questions come up, and the understanding of the child and the mind of the child grows. We want to be there to be the teachers for them. And the last part of the hadith is the 7 years after, which is from 14 and really onward, is to be their friend, to befriend them, and like a good friend would do, you act as their compass, their support, someone they can lean on, and that relationship again is built on growth, because really none of us are growing, none of us stop growing. We all grow, even as adults. And the nice thing about a friend is you grow together with that friend, and I think that paradigm is so fundamental for the Muslims to understand about the Muslim family.
Jazakallah khair.
Jazakumullah khairan, Dr. Kharam. If I may ask a quick follow-up, and just also to be a little bit, give a little bit more practical examples. So part of parenting is also setting up an environment. So what do I consider as I create an environment for my children, an environment that enables them to grow into strong, independent, and resilient Muslim children. So environment factors that I can create or build at my house.
Thank you, Brother Khaled. That's a very important question. The environment is not an easy one to answer or to even explore in this scenario, but it's based on certain principles. And I think in the introduction was mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala focuses on the effort and not necessarily the outcome. So our job is to strive with our best way to make that environment. And it's different from family to family based on a number of other factors like cultural factors and extended family. But our job is to do our best. When what that means, I think, is really, first, again, it begins with the self. So the children are they're expert observers. I'm sure we see this. So they will observe everything, and therefore it becomes very important that we as parents are really like not on our best behavior, but the idea that we give the best example, and don't let them, because one of the things, the drawbacks, is that they can have expert observation, but they don't have expert interpretation. And what that means is they may see us doing things that we may understand or understand the limits of what we're doing and why, but they may not. So that's one aspect, again, beginning with the self. I think the other key point is to have an environment where we don't become the reason why the children question, or not question, but the reason why they don't. The children are on a fitra, they're on a natural state, which is a state of submission, we believe. And so if a parent is doing something to block that fitra from the child, because if we were all left on our own, we would naturally come to the idea of belief, and what we have to be careful about, especially, is in the environment, that we don't block that fitra from flourishing and from recognizing the signs of the Creator, or from asking questions. And sometimes we have to be very careful about this, not blocking questions that are important for children to be able to ask.
Jazakallah khair. So I want to, I don't know if Brother Khalid, if you had a follow-up or if I can move.
Yeah, please go ahead, Sister Maimuna.
Jazakallah khair. So I think the other question I wanted to go into and move along these practical aspects is, and I think both Brother Khuram, Dr. Khuram Khan and Sister Sarah here are talking about is the modeling. So it's your own personal development as parents, as you're nurturing that within your children. Now, there's other factors, and that is the external world around them. And so how do you make choices for them, and how do you navigate them in the world around them? You know, even simple choices like extracurriculars and those types of things. So moving along the practical, and now also thinking about that external. And maybe Sister Sarah, you can start us off.
Yeah, Jazakallah khairan, Sister Maimuna. And, I agree with, subhanAllah, what Brother Khuram was referring to before about that modeling as a parent, as well as that open environment where kids can ask questions, can make mistakes. And so, Sister Maimuna, you're talking about the idea of balancing those experiences for our kids. And I think balance is the key word. I think it's important to acknowledge, and as a parent myself, I'm a mother of 4 kids, that it can be very challenging and can be very difficult, and it can vary depending on your child. My 4 kids, they're all very, very different, all those same, environment, same home conditions, same mother and father. But each of those children will require, different strategies, different tools, different approaches. And that's the beauty of the Islamic tarbiyah model, right? And when we think about the word tarbiyah, which is the Arabic word for nurturing or upbringing of our children, the Islamic framework of that is very unique. So what is that tarbiyah, or that change, or that nurturing to? And that's what we think about. What's that delta or change? Like, what do we want to achieve with our kids' upbringing? And as Brother Khurram said, it starts with our own self. What do we want to become as people? And really what it is to align with the Quran and Sunnah, to align with La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Now that seems quite simple, but with everything that's happening in the world, that could be very difficult with our young people and with our kids, and we have to work hard to work on that from a young age. So I think that idea of tarbiyah, as Dr. Khurram says, starts with our own selves. And if you look at the example of the Quran, if we look at the da'wah of the different prophets and how they called people to Islam, and even with their own children and the different stories, we see that and the scholars speak of the different tarbiyah approaches. And the Quran is a perfect combination of, love, tarbiyah through love, tarbiyah through motivation, tarbiyah through encouragement, tarbiyah through, consequence, right? And so as the Quran speaks to the human mind and the human soul with those different motivation and factors, this is what we learn with how to deal with it with our own kids. And so sometimes it's an approach of love and care. And as Brother Khurram said, in the young age, we really believe that the most effective thing is love, and love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's what we should nurture our kids around. Later on and early on, we bring in factors of, consequence and accountability. And so when you speak about, Sister Maimuna, about what it means to provide the environment and provide the experiences to allow our kids to develop or to give them those different opportunities where there's that combination. I think it's important for us as parents to look at it from a very balanced and holistic approach. So sometimes we tend to overprotect. So, we don't want our children to fail. We don't want to put them in difficult situations. So we have very controlled environments. So we put them in extracurriculars and our activities that they will succeed in, and we're almost walking in front of them so that they don't fall. And it's really, it proves very quickly that we cannot do that all the time, because life, and this is part of our own aqidah, is full of tests, and we are going to be tested and they're going to be tested. So we have to teach them through our tarbiyah, through our nurturing of them, how to fail and how to recover. And the first and foremost way to teach them that is through role modeling and through teachable moments. And so they actually, as Dr. Khurram said, will observe how we respond to crisis situations, and we'll all go through that. A death of a family, a loss of a job, a bad day, right? And we're parents, we're human, we make mistakes, we have our good moments and our bad moments, but we have to, try to intentionally try to work on modeling how to be resilient in those times. At the same time, we have to give them opportunity to try and to maybe fail once or twice and help them make sense of it. So it's so important after some difficult moments, you sit down and take it apart for your child in an age appropriate way, depending on their age, and explain to them what's happening, right? So that they can learn to fail and to recover. I think that's the number one thing that we need to focus on as parents, is that we teach our young people our kids to recover from difficult situations, as well as to stand alone as Muslims, because this tarbiyah that I'm talking about, to align with the Quran and Sunnah, will be challenging in this day and age. And so again, those conversations, those opportunities to come and discuss and to take apart some of these difficult things and have these conversations, and it needs a community. We can't always do it alone. So again, finding those other things, going to the halaqah in the masjid, taking your children to the masjid, giving them those different opportunities, either Islamic school or weekend school, having other families that you meet together so that we can help each other with raising our children. So grandparents and extended family. So providing those larger circles of support that can help you in that mission, right? And not everything might align in those circles, but there'll be enough alignment there to help. So I don't know if I answered your question. I think I went everywhere a little bit, but there's some things that we need to consider when working on balancing our kids' experiences, inshallah.
جزاكم الله خير. It seems that you answered all the questions for the show now.
Sorry
So
about that.
let me ask the questions in the opposite way. So sometimes it's easier to learn this way. So how can we avoid messing up? What can we do to mess up the tarbiyah of our children? And there are several dimensions. Of course, there is the dimension of being too strict versus being too lenient, and spoiling my kids. There are the dimensions that relate to making them too independent versus being extremely controlling, or giving them specific, very limited choices and very limited. Things along these lines. And I think one of my favorites is basically, how do I my relationship with children from it being in a transactional relationship and a continuous negotiation. I think many parents have the same challenges, and because parents almost never win when it is an argument or a negotiation. So how do avoid messing up?
That's a great question, Brother Khalid. How to avoid messing up? Again, the premise is that we do our best effort. The outcomes are in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We know many examples of even prophets whose children didn't end up following the right way, mentioned in the Quran. And these are the examples that are given to us as even the most righteous people, the prophets who were given guidance directly. They may not have been successful in our terms, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah is the one that guides to the straight path. So we do our best effort. That's the first point. And whether or not we mess up is kind of out of our hands. But a couple of points to add, to look for. One is to always be positive, and I think we have to balance the idea of always being positive and giving children encouragement with the risk of being too transactional. So sometimes it's, if you do this, we will give you this. And if you pray 5 times a day, you'll get this. If you fast, you'll get this. If you have good behavior, you'll get this. This type of transactional relationship is actually quite dangerous. And our focus really, again, is to bring them back towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure specifically, as opposed to our specific goals and pleasures that we might set for them. So what I mean to say is the transaction has to be reframed in a way that's more positive. So I'll give you an example. This comes up that the children are fidgeting during the prayer, for example. This is a specific example, but I think we all experience this, and we want them to concentrate and focus. And one of the things we might do is, after the prayer, ask them, why can't you stay still for the few minutes that it takes to do the prayer? The reframing of this is really focusing on the parts of the prayer that they were focused in, and to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be very pleased to see that you did that sujood, or the part of the prayer that they were very focused in and attentive, successful. And the next time you can try to increase that even more and more. And we take away the transactional approach with a positive and a forward moving approach with the children, and this will keep them focused on the right ambition, which is to get the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to seek the mercy and love, not the love for the parents, but the love for the Creator, and achieve that high state of being a Muslim. And we demonstrate that ourselves, but being positive, that's the key thing. The other thing is, the second point I talk about is the idea of opportunities, and finding the right opportunities to find a teachable moment. And this is a trick, and it's not really easy. But if we can look for those opportunities, those memories, where the child will be able to have a moment that reflects in their heart of, I learned something in this moment, or I connected with my parents in this moment, or I understood something in this moment. And I'll give you an example from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, in a hadith by Umar ibn Abi Salama, who was one of the children at the time, who would be with the Prophet ﷺ and be one of the companions and look after him as a young boy. The companion narrates a hadith where he says, I used to have my hands in the food when I was eating, and one time the Prophet ﷺ said to me, oh boy, before you eat, mention Allah's name. Eat with your right hand, and eat from the part of the food or the plate that is near to you. And so these three moments, these three examples were emphasized in one teachable moment. And it's those kind of moments that if we can find, can have the most impact and connect the children where they should be connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Dr. Khurram, for these practical pieces of advice. I want to remind all our viewers tonight that you can ask your questions directly to our guests. And if you would like to do that, you can type your question in on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. And if you want to join us live and ask your question through a Zoom room, you can do that. Find us meeting ID 905 822 2626. Now, moving along with these this conversation, having you both, Dr. Khurram and Sister Sarah, as mother and father, as parents, the question that comes around also is parenting boys and girls. You're both parents of multiple children, and so how do you approach this, and how do you think about this? How do you navigate this process of nurturing, Allah-centered parenting, and thinking about this of when you parent boys and girls? Are there differences? Maybe we'll start with Sister Sarah and then move to Dr. Khurram.
Yeah, so this is an interesting question because there's actually a lot of research out there that will speak about, if we look at education, all right, there's a lot of research coming out about, how education systems impact boys and how boys learn and how girls learn. And there's a lot of discourse and, difference of opinion and trends coming out from there. But if we look at the Islamic framework, and look at our responsibility, first and foremost, these children that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us as gifts, they're an amana. So we need to frame our approach to parenting in that sense of amana or responsibility towards really trying our best to help our kids navigate this world and become their best. And sometimes that measure of success, we measure by society's measure of success. So we say, if my child grows up to be, a successful doctor, a successful engineer, a successful professional, I've done my part. I've given them the best education. And yes, that is part of it. We want them to be independent, strong, young people who can stand on their own 2 feet and who can, self-sustain their homes and their lives. But when we look at either our sons or our daughters, we should look at our measure of success as, them becoming young Muslims or adult Muslims who, first and foremost, are connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and live Islam to its fullest. Second of all, have a role, and it's it's extension of the first part, are agents of change, have a role in society and to make important change in our communities. And so when we look at our sons and daughters and we work on those different pieces to help them gain that understanding and gain the experiences and the tools that they become, first of all, when we look at the gender, the boy or girl, I think before that, we look at the different personality of our kids to see how we can support them to be that. But we should also look at, our boys and girls onto what role they're going to play as adults. And as I said, they're going to be Muslims with a strong Muslim identity and connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, agents of change. And then inshallah, we want them to grow to be, healthy members of a family, right? To be mothers, to be fathers, to be parents themselves. So what does that mean in our tarbiyah, in our parenting? It means that we have to prepare our young men to be fathers and those who are going to support and take care, caring fathers who are able to support and take care and be those family members that our society needs and that Islam has taught us and to be like the Prophet ﷺ and his model of that. So that starts from a young age to make sure that they understand what it means to be a Muslim man, what it means to be a Muslim man that will have the responsibility of a family. What does that look like in terms of, care, responsibility, agency in terms of what they do, success in their life and their akhirah. Similarly, our young girls, we want them to grow to be strong Muslim women who, are making change in the world. So we have to prepare them for that. But we also want them to be mothers and who will support strong homes and help raise the next generation and be partners to those young men that we talked about and to do great things. So those nuances, there's slight differences in the roles that we want them to play. Obviously, as I said, number one, Muslim identity, strong belief systems, and making a difference in their societies, but prepare them to I think we can have a whole session on, the different problems that we have in our society now, and how gender roles have the lack of clarity, and how homes are broken, and how Muslim homes, have been impacted by all of this. So I think we should we should look ahead as parents, and we should help build the next generation so that we have strong families. And so there's a lot of that that we really need to think about. And I can talk a lot about this, but I think just as, some guiding points, and there's some books that are being written and articles, and I think it's very important as parents that we look into this, whether we have boys or girls, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much. Dr. Khurram, I'll invite you to also share your perspectives on this as fathers, and what your perspectives are for us in terms of thinking about, is there distinctions in how we approach and raise boys and girls?
Brother
Thank
Khurram
you.
has a special event planned this weekend. And it's really special. It's a father-daughter camp or retreat. So maybe he can tell us why he did this, and it's linked directly to the question.
Well, I have to have full disclosure. We've done a number of father-son retreats. So my daughters
Okay, good.
said, "What about the father-daughter retreat?" And so, inshallah, we're having this soon as well. But one of the things I think Sister Sarah mentioned this as well, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the man, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the woman, and the man is not the same as the woman. They're different. But that doesn't mean that they can't do complementary roles, or they can't have different positions. Certainly we see this in modern society and Muslim families, and there's nothing wrong with this, first of all, that a woman can earn money and have a career and have a profession. The essence of what I think the question lends it to is they are different, and in fact every child is different. Within the boys there can be differences, within the girls there can be differences, and what we want to be able to teach them is the importance of being a model Muslim, being a model citizen, and being a contributor. And part of that contribution is contributing in the family life. And really the essence of family life, as anyone who's married knows, is that this is a team. And in a team, there's give and take, there's understanding, there has to be, or the family unit itself, the marriage will be weakened. So what we should really focus for them, and one of the things that I try to do practically with them is we even talk about how the children, even when they're in those teachable years, we ask them, how do you see your family being? How many children do you want to have? And of course, they're biased by the size of their family and their cousins and their families, and just to hear their perspective and plant that seed of, oh, I'd like to have a few children, not a big family, or maybe I want a big family. And what does that mean? Well, how are you going to handle that? Well, it takes a lot of hard work and the risk from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to come for you to be able to support the family. So you have to work hard, you have to work hard in school, you have to seek for good opportunities for employment. And so all these questions come about from this idea, and you give them the example and find out what their thoughts are about the family and the roles. And again, I find anyways, each child is very different. Specifically, how do we strengthen the bond with the boy or the girl? I think it's good old-fashioned hard work, spending the time and the energy to get to know the child, what their likes are, what their dislikes are, what their tendencies are, what their fears are, and explore those with them and get to know them. And if you respect those things and what they're thinking about, they will respect you as well. And it's and if there are things that we want to improve or change, one of the most important principles, and the principle in Islam really, is the idea that change is something that occurs gradually. And so when we talk about moving the position or the ambition or the struggle that a child may have, it has to be something that we appreciate is done with gentleness, because the Prophet ﷺ was very gentle with anyone that he interacted with. I gave the example of the teachable moments, and there's other examples from a hadith about how the Prophet ﷺ interacted with young people or even with older people to teach them in a very gentle way, but also in a gradual way. And from the Quran, we have this beautiful example. People often say, well, how was alcohol, for example, forbidden for the Muslims? Because we know when the Prophet ﷺ came, alcohol was very common and widespread. And this is just an example to teach gradual change. But those stages, they were 4 distinct stages that took place in 4 specific verses in the Quran that highlighted the transition from alcohol was okay to alcohol was forbidden. And it's a very instructive example for believers and for parents about how we make changes if we want to achieve a durable response, which is through gradualism, through gentle minded approach. And this is a lesson for all parents, and of course myself first and foremost.
Jazakallah khair. Brother Khalid, we cannot hear you.
Sorry, I was saying, just if I may summarize what I am hearing from both of you is that there are common things for boys and girls, and that resonates with their role as Muslims, and we're focused on making them and nurture them into being Muslims who have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the center and as their reference, as their guide, and fulfill the responsibility of Muslim, and that's common for both. But also we prepare them for their respective roles as men and women of Islam, taking into consideration these variations that come from how we view life through an Islamic lens. So let me take it to another fun aspect in parenting, and that's especially for fathers is a bit more challenging, and that's initiating and engaging in conversations or teaching them through conversations. And I always joke about this. The funniest is the father-son conversations that you can actually time them under the minute. So how do we engage in conversations? And you can see also the extreme opposite of basically everything is a conversation and everything takes a very long time, and I can't get them to do this, or I can't get them to do that without basically taking a law degree. So basically, how can I use conversations and into building and shaping my children, and then how do I engage in difficult conversations? So let's take the example of, for example, participating in basically discouraging them or explaining to them why are we not engaging in these kind of celebrations that are not necessarily Islamic, like Halloween or Valentine's.
Thank you, Brother Khalid. That's a difficult question, as you prefaced. Thank you for asking, though, because it is an important one. In terms of, I can tell you from a medical perspective, this is a common common issue. How, when you do a medical interview, how do you get the information from the patient? And there's certain principles that we use. And these are, many of these are Islamic principles too. The Prophet ﷺ, when he would talk to someone, would turn his entire body towards them, such to give his full attention to them. I think that's very important. We can't have these meaningful conversations while we're, looking on our phone and trying to have a conversation. It doesn't work like that. So the idea of being involved and engaged, that's the first and most important thing, and having the right intention. You're there to help the child to strengthen the relationship. And then the other thing is the way the questions are asked. I think open-ended questioning is the best way. The kinds of questions that are not single answer questions, and this has to do more with about the hows and the whys rather than the what's and the who, because they open up dialogue and allows you to explore. And the one thing, if we just focus on listening rather than talking, this will allow the flow of information to come towards us as we hope for. Sometimes when we want to have a conversation, we forget that it's not one way. It's not from us outward. So I think these are some basic principles: giving the full attention, using an open-ended approach, and sometimes just being silent and listening. The best thing we can do is really listen to our children. That's when they know that they have your attention, as opposed to them being lectured or being told by you something, or taught by you something that doesn't really stick, and it's not really that's their time that's being valued.
It seems you're leaving the difficult question, difficult conversations for Sister Sarah, the other part of the question.
So there's,
Go ahead.
thank you, Brother Khuram. So I agree with Brother Khuram, subhanAllah. Like, I think if we look at the prophetic example, the social emotional intelligence there, that how he approached children. Like, there's examples of how the Prophet ﷺ approached children. The example that Brother Khuram said to show, the hadith that he said, and how he taught that young boy how to eat, the adab of eating. SubhanAllah, if you look at the hadith, there's very little lecturing, and there's so much like teachable moments and short learning through examples. I think it's so important for us as parents to really try to maintain an open communication. It gets a lot harder as our kids get older, and I know there's a lot of challenges when they hit preteen and teen years, but we have to try to work on it from the younger years. And as Brother Khuram said, you have to listen. You have to, I want to add to that, you have to sometimes be vulnerable and share your own emotion and say, when I remember feeling scared in a situation, and apologizing when you've made a mistake or you've done something wrong. So opening up your own heart to your child so your child can open up their heart. We even tell teachers at school that a child can sense when the teacher loves them and cares for them, and parenting is obviously even much more. So when we open our hearts to our children and show a little bit of vulnerability, it does come back to us. Not always instantaneously. And tarbiyah, or nurturing our kids, is not always, you won't see the fruits of that right away, but that connection that between us and our children will remain there. Also creating those opportunities. I remember when I was growing up, I come from a large family. I used to wait till I'm in the car by myself with my mom, so because that was the only, the time I could have one-on-one time with my mom. So we live, and I know this. I talk to many parents about this. We live such busy lives. Balancing between our works and our lives and our extracurricular and this child and that child, and so sometimes having that ideal one-on-one time with our kids doesn't happen. But just trying to create it, right, when we're doing something together before bed, in the car, and having those conversations. And I have older kids who are hitting their teenage years. Many times they won't be ready to talk, and just saying, I'm here to talk to you. I'm here to listen when you're ready to tell me what's going on, and maintaining that confidentiality a little, and letting them feel that it's it's going to stay with you if it's something that they don't want anybody else to know in the household, right? And obviously you have to make that judgment call when you need to bring in the other parent. The other thing which I think is really important is to never show shock, right? Like if they come and talk to you about a friend who's going through something really bad, or a bad word they heard at school, or depending on their age, try to manage your emotions. If we overreact, that's a signal to our kids that, I can't tell mama about this bad thing that happened at school, or I can't ask that question because it's off limits in our home. And so it's, I tell myself and I tell people that there's no contradiction between compassion and clarity and not compromising. So we can show compassion to our children and to people we work with, or youth, without compromising on our belief system. So we can show love and care and empathy when talking about difficult questions without compromising on our principles. And it's a very fine line, and I learned this the hard way, right? We can, and so that's leading into the second question that Brother Khalid asked about, when there's those difficult moments where you really have to put your foot down. You've done the discussion and the negotiation and the empathy and shared emotions, and validated emotion, but you have to say this is unacceptable. And that's our role as parents. We have to sometimes put our foot down and say, I'm sorry, Habibi, I'm sorry, Habibti, we don't do this because we're here to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this act or this celebration or this, event doesn't align with pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the way we're, in our home. And so I know it's hard, and I know you're not happy right now, but this is something that so you have those discussions, you have those, and that child might be really angry at that moment, but then inshallah later you can come back and reframe it. So I think those conversations are important, but as parents, the people responsible in the house, we sometimes have to be firm and clear in what's right and wrong, and make those hard decisions when our kids are not ready to do it on their own. So it's about that balance, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Sarah. As we start to kind of wind down on this, there is a question that we received from a viewer, and that is perhaps even taking from what you were saying, Sister Sarah, about clarity. You know, we may have a clear vision or understanding of how we want to raise our children. Perhaps we have, you know, we've referred to these resources Islamically and our references. However, when dealing with the real world, there is often a disparity. And so how do we then deal with what's happening externally around us with multiple worldviews that our children are being exposed to, and then kind of still maintaining that clarity in how we parent and making sure that that clarity is then translated to our children. So that's a question from our viewers, and I'll let either of you answer, inshallah.
Do you want me to go first, Brother Khurram, or are you ready to go?
Sure.
Okay.
Please go ahead if you.
Okay, so just to build on what I was saying, subhanAllah, there are going to be difficult moments because our neighbors may not necessarily value systems. The larger community, doesn't always. Interestingly, right now, Muslim to Muslim peer pressure, if you look at the study, is on a rise for teenagers, right? Because our Muslim community has grown so much here in Canada that sometimes, Muslim young people are being negatively influenced, negative peer pressure from other Muslims. So there's many times where you're going to have to say, this is not right, and other people might not, be aligned with that. And I think there's one of the very most important things that we need to teach our kids from a young age, that there's going to be moments that we're going to be different than other people. And there's going to be moments when they're going to have to stand alone, right? And it's hard. It's very hard to get our young people, our kids, I keep thinking about being in a school, our children to be ready for those moments. But we have to help them through it. And so there's many times that, we're going to have open conversations, that all of us are on a journey. We're all on a journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we may have different rules, different decisions in this house than other people might have. And that's okay. And sometimes it's going to be easy, and sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable, and that's okay. There's also a really good technique where you find other families with similar value systems. Maybe your own sister or aunt or uncle, grandparents, friend. As kids grow older, or even in their young ages, it's important for them to have several trusted adults in their lives. Sometimes mama, they see her every day at home, and she can say things till she's blue, and it just doesn't feel right. But when khalto or auntie tells them, because they have a special place for that khalto, they're ready to hear it. So it's an important strategy to have those people in our community that can be those trusted adults for our kids when we need a second voice to support our positions, and I found that to be quite effective. And so build that team, build that village that will help support your parenting, and kind of tug on it when you need it. And we can do that for each other, right? So that we're supporting one another when we need to, inshallah.
It's so difficult now, though, Sister Sarah. It's a great point about it takes a village to raise a child, but how do we do that when we don't have the baker anymore, and we don't have the mechanic in our village? It's all industrialized, and it's a blessing in some ways, but a challenge to have that experience. One of the ways practically we do the same idea is to have those close families. Our kids carpool with other parents, and we know they have this time with them, that they're good people, they share our values, they'll have some discussion. When it comes to this question that was raised by the viewer, and thank you for the question, but the idea that how do we have to be clear about what's right and wrong outside the home, and again, make it a teachable moment. That when we're taught about what we should be, sorry, cramp. What we should be doing in the oh my God, sorry.
Okay, sorry.
I was
Are you okay?
Just a cramp from spasm. Sorry. The idea when we're in the world, the Prophet ﷺ taught us that if you see something that is not right, you should have really one of three positions, and this is a thing we should be talking about with our families. We either, if we can, we change it with our hands. If we can't do that, then we say something about it, or we change it, make a change with our mouth and with our tongue. And if we can't do that, we hold it as wrong in our heart. And the important thing here is we hold the sin or the action wrong, not necessarily the individual. Because we're all the children of Adam, we're all the creation of God. And God the Almighty, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will will give guidance to whomever he pleases, whenever he pleases. And so the person or the individual that's in this position, which may be away from our personal values or our values as a Muslim community, we don't hold the person specifically. We look at the sin, and that's the three steps that we should be taking. And this should be very clear. And again, we look for. I think these are opportunities where we look for teachable moments to talk about what's right and what's wrong, and how this is in line with what Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, the God-centeredness that we want to have. The other point, I'll just go back to what Sister Sarah was saying, which I think is excellent, is not to show any shock. Right. Again, I'll give an example from the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ in a hadith. It's a very famous hadith where a Bedouin, someone that was not familiar with the Islam or the teachings of Islam, came to the masjid, and they urinated in the corner of the masjid. Now you can imagine someone doing this, and as you would expect, or may not have expected, but the companions, the most righteous companions who were with the Prophet ﷺ at the time, were very upset. They were shocked. Some had withdrawn their swords and what the Prophet ﷺ showed us in this beautiful example, which there's many benefits and lessons from, was he stopped them, and he brought the level of tension down in the masjid. And the first thing he said was, let the man finish what he's doing. And there's even just many benefits in this, but the idea that he was the calm in the storm. And as Muslims, especially Muslims living in the West, but really anywhere in the world, we have to know what's right. We have to know what's wrong. We have to know where there's gray areas. There's a famous hadith about this as well. But this knowledge will prepare us, and we have to have the resilience to know when to be able to calm things down for the children and give them and find them the teachable moments, as was the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Jazakumullah khairan, Brother Khuram. And the Prophet also encouraged action after this calm by asking the Sahaba to clean it up, throwing sand over, and then teaching him after. So that's the balance that you both are referring to. We don't have much time, but there is an important question that we'd like you to deal with, and because really, especially as Muslims and as Muslim communities who resonate many of the aching in many different parts of the Muslim world, and subhanallah, because we are Muslims are everywhere, so we share pains throughout the world, and the most recent is the earthquake in Turkey, and how many people lost loved ones, and devastating stories and pictures and all this. So how do we balance? And then prior to that, there were the floods in Pakistan and many other situations in Palestine and otherwise. So how do we balance nurturing and raising our kids to care about affairs of Muslims and be proactive on this side, and also while also dealing with or teaching them how to deal with these difficult calamities or difficult tests and tribulations that peoples are facing. Sometimes it's difficult even to explain. So how do we make this balance, and how do we make them deal with the calamity and from one side, and also proactively be caring about Muslims everywhere? Sarah, do you want to start?
Sure. So this is something that I've been really thinking about a lot as a mother and as a principal, because of an Islamic school where we it's incumbent on us to reframe and to make sense of these situations for our students and for my own kids. And we cannot ignore them just because we live in Canada and move on and shelter our kids from them. I don't think that's the right approach in any way. And so I thought about it deeply, and looking at the different ways to reframe. There's so much opportunity. SubhanAllah, it is a crisis, and it's devastating on so many levels. But it's an opportunity to ground our kids, our students, our children in the correct framing of why, SubhanAllah, these things happen, so that they can understand it. So our kids will pick up on things that are happening in the world. They'll hear the news, they'll see our reactions, they'll hear other kids talking about it. They're not, we might think that they're protected from it, but they're not. They pick up on a lot of this, and if we don't reframe and make sense of it, at least to a certain level, they're going to draw their own conclusions. And so it's so important for us to take those times to. And so my youngest daughter, she heard about this. She's heard about us adults talking about it. So she was very scared to go to sleep. It's very scary to think about a whole, homes crumbling, people dying, people losing everything. And I struggled at that moment to think of the words to comfort her. I mean, even us as adults, it's becoming very hard to make sense of it. But again, if we think about that God-centeredness, that a very basic aqidah concept that we need to ingrain in our kids is the idea that we were created to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we will be tested. And our ultimate happiness is in Jannah. And so to basically tell her, I told her that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to test all of us. And this is their test. And you know what? Those people that died, they got the VIP first class tickets to Jannah. I told her that. I said, they got Jannah, inshallah, they're shuhada. Now it's on us right now to think about our own course of way to Jannah. So what are we going to do to find our place in Jannah? And number two, what is going to be our role to help the people who struggle through this? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a wisdom. I told her He has a special reason that we don't understand, that these things happen. And He speaks about, and on the day of judgment, we'll understand that reason, inshallah. He'll give us that clarity. But those people have Jannah, and we have to think of our way towards Jannah, and what can we do to help? And so I took my kids to the store, and we started buying. I knew that we could, if we donate online, that may be more useful. But we started buying things to help out, because giving them action to make change helps heal and helps give them a purpose and helps teach them what to do next, right? And when the next crisis comes their way. So I think explaining it through our aqidah lens, why these things happen, telling them that you will also be tested in a way, and let's get ready for that test by connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, making dua together, because that's an action in itself, doing some kind of volunteer community service to help make a difference, and also talking about them as our Muslim brothers and sisters. We have to care about them, we have to help them out. And so bringing all these different ideas together and showing them how to do it. And I think it's hard. And depending on the age of the children, we'll talk about different things. Our older kids in high school, we talk to them about the sense of Allah's control and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control and how we have to remember that, and so on. There's so many different facets, and I know we're tight on time. But again, grounding them in those belief systems, having an action associated with it, and talking them through it to help them make sense of it, subhanAllah.
Jazakumullah khairan. I know we're ran out of time, but if Brother Kharam wants to, do you want to add something, Brother Kharam?
No, I think those are all excellent points. I think, like you said, we have to be observant at the same time. Some children are affected differently by these calamities. For some, and I think one thing we can do and should do is, we don't do this enough, and it's a point of just making dua in a very public and open way, that they see that we as individuals are supplicating and praying for the ease of the difficulty from these situations. And that, again, just that if they can witness us caring about this kind of thing, in addition from buying things and making donations, but that dua and the care and concern, if they can see that, they'll benefit extremely, inshallah. So we should remember that, in addition to what everything Sister Sarah mentioned. Thank you.
Jazakumullah khairan. I really enjoyed the conversation, and pass it back to Sister Maimuna to close.
Jazakallah khair. So this was part of our series on the institution of the family within the Islamic framework. And we had Dr. Khuram Khan and Sister Sara Atiya tonight talking to us about parenting, Allah-centered parenting. And you can watch this again. Of course, it was very beneficial, and it will also be available on a podcast. Join us every night, Thursday evenings, 7:30 Eastern Time, live here for Islam and Life. And Brother Khalid will ask you to help us do a closing dua, inshallah.
Yes, inshallah. And next week, Sister Maimuna, as we do, we're going to discuss, inshallah, how do we combat racism through or from an Islamic perspective, inshallah. And we close by asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to to accept those who were martyred in his highest levels of paradise. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to ease the sufferings of everybody who's been affected. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring the Muslims together and to bring all humanity together to support one another in these kinds of tests and calamities. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guidance and for support in doing what is best for him and what pleases him, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاكم الله خير.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Islam in Life is an online production by the Muslim Association of Canada.